Thank you so much, Peter. It's such a joy to see you and to talk to you, as ever.
Same from California, Ruth.
Yes. So
Welcome.
We're going to start by asking. I'm going to ask you just to talk to us a bit about your experience of confinement as an artist.
Clearly, their virus is here to invite us to get more serious about every part of our lives. And clearly the virus has on its mind questions of social justice. And this, human beings never get serious until people are dying. And suddenly you say, oh, this is actually life and death. And we've been ignoring it for a long time. And now we can't ignore it. We have to really understand that this is life and death. And with the presence of this injustice will now, zones of injustice, sites of injustice will be highlighted by the virus. And the virus is going to insist that all of us stop whatever we're doing. And usually you say, okay, I'm too busy to deal with these really crucial questions. And I always tell my students, if you want to know what the most important questions in your life are, it's everything you don't have time to think about. That's how you know it's important. Because you tell yourself, I can't deal with that now. And the virus just said, okay, whatever you have not dealt with, we're stopping time right now for you to deal with it. And that is why in many traditions, sickness is understood not just as an affliction, but as a messenger, as a teacher, and as a way of creating the space and time in your life that you never told yourself you had. And so that that space of reflection, the space of quiet, the space of actually getting closer to the people you need to be close to emotionally, the space of really looking in the mirror, understanding your own behavior, asking yourself, what do you really need in your life? What do you not need? What have you been doing that you really should stop doing? And I think in terms of the climate emergency, we all have habit energies that are not good for the planet. And can we now rethink things we all do every day? Can we do them differently? Can we make a different set of choices? And the virus is here to just, make everything stop and say, what are the choices you're making and what are consequences of those choices? And then, of course, we're in an economy that has never made sense, a kind of nightmare, distortion of elephantine capitalism that never had anybody's best interest in mind except the new generation of billionaires. And is that what the world has come to? Have we achieved in the last 50 years that a bunch of people are now billionaires and everyone else is poor? And we have more money than any time in human history in the hands of a handful of people, a level of wealth that's obscene, and meanwhile a level of social and political impoverishment that is a low point in human history. And one of the most beautiful things about the virus is that its real agenda turns out to be Black Lives Matter. And we didn't know that's what the virus was coming to announce and coming to insist upon in a way that it can't be ignored. What's beautiful about the virus is that suddenly, the economy shut down, people are staying at home, and suddenly everyone had to go to the streets. And suddenly you didn't say, oh, I have to go to work today. You said, no, I have to go demonstrate today. And we had the time and space to do that. And millions of people all over the world took over the streets and said, it is time for a new era. We cannot go backwards. We have to go forwards. And of course, again, what I'm telling my students is, what's next is not what's scary. what we're coming from is what's scary. We're coming from something so wrong, so horrifying, that we accept it. We say, oh, it's inconvenient to challenge this right now. In fact, it should have been challenged 40 years ago. And look where we are now. We're in a terrible place. So we have to go back, retrace our steps, pull up by the roots these weeds that have grown into trees, take the right path. So anyway, just to say the period of sequestration and really enforced reflection has been very powerful. And I have to say, Ruth, your own situation there in France and in England is very moving from the point of view of Los Angeles. Because Los Angeles, we have a little more space. It's a little more green. But Paris, the lockdown, very, very intense for people. And of course, California, we moved very quickly to shelter and California was really ahead. And then suddenly, in the last 10 days, we're really behind. And suddenly, we're adding thousands of more cases every day this week. So I think the other point of the virus is, what the virus was, in France in the 14th century, which is human beings, we think we know the future. We think we have everything under control. We're planning for everything. And of course, we have no idea what's happening in the next 5 minutes of our lives. We actually just have to calm down and become humble again and realize we are very small actors in a very large picture.
It's been a revelation, actually, talking over the last few weeks, you and I, during the confinement. And isn't the word interesting, confinement? I mean, now it's a word, confinement in French, lockdown in English. It's a word that used to mean something only to people in prison, but now means something to all of us. But we've been doing talks in public together for 25 years or more. And I think it's only in the last few weeks that I've ever heard you talk about your garden, Peter. So that when I think about the answer to the question for you as an artist, what has it been like this period? There are two things that I've been struck by. One is your garden, which is a tremendously beautiful example of coming down to a new level of basic importance, things that are small but vital, but also the way that you have been rehearsing recently, which I think is a new way for you of rehearsing with artists that are scattered all over the world.
My garden is a little bit of a shocking story because while I was traveling last year, they found termites in the building where my apartment is. And so, as happens in California all the time, the entire building had to be tented and pumped with poison to kill all the termites. And I have this beautiful roof garden of cactus and succulents, and nobody could move all that. And so they were in the tent and pumped with poison and died horrible, painful deaths. And for months, it was just a question of removing the carcasses, the dead bodies, and carrying them down off the roof. And my roof was a Holocaust site. It was just devastating. And I couldn't even go up there. And then at the beginning of the virus, old friends who work in the Huntington Gardens, which are the most beautiful gardens in Southern California, with the most beautiful cactus garden that is now more than 100 years old. And so the cactuses are just spectacular, like dinosaurs. I mean, just huge and glorious. They said, oh, we haven't come over for a long time. Can we visit you? They came. They said, let's go upstairs and see the garden. And of course, they went and they just saw this horrifying sight. And 2 days later, I got this phone call early in the morning saying, how soon can we come over? And they had dug up 25 plants from their own garden, and they brought them over and they planted them on my roof. And suddenly this went from a place of total despair to just this amazing beginning of new life. And of course, an act of unbelievable generosity by friends who just said, we can't let this space remain sad and devastated. And so there was a festival of planting for an entire day. and of course, then I started going up there and weeding and taking care of things, and then making some transplants, and and so now it's a very special place to be again. And I will now spend a lot of the summer gardening.
And apart from the gardening, talk to us a bit about your process of creation, that now still you stay at home, but you're creating, I know, work that will come out later on this year.
I'm very, for many years, I've been obsessed with a sutra, a Buddhist sutra written in the 1st century, the Vimalakirti Sutra. And I've wanted to stage it. And I've been collecting images of it. It turns out all the images come from one place, the Dongwang Caves in the far west of northern China, and which was the old frontier of China on the edge of Central Asia. And the triangulation with Tibet and this path, of the Silk Road that led directly to Persia and to Venice, and this incredible connecting tissue that the world was actually more connected in the 4th century than it is now. And this and what was flowing across this road was, of course, were merchants, but really were monks and spiritual paths. Really, Buddhism moved from India into China, but so many versions of so many spiritual traditions. And the Vimalakirti Sutra came into China in the 1st century, and it's an amazing text. It has kind of surprising comedy in it. It has miracles. It has these transformations that are awe-inspiring. But it's one of the very few Buddhist sutras that's not narrated by Buddha. It's narrated by a businessman named Vimalakirti, who is very, very sick. And it's about, what do we have to learn from an ill person? And Buddha says to his disciples, all the famous disciples, you have to go visit this businessman who's sick. You'll learn a lot from him. And then the sutra has 2 chapters of all of Buddha's main disciples giving excuses about why they don't want to go visit this guy. And if you're serious about Buddhism, you've become a monk, what are you doing running a business? What do all of this stuff. Finally, Buddha says, shut up and go. So they go to this guy's house. Of course, there's a lot of them. They don't fit into the house. So the first miracle is he has to redo the architecture of his home in an instant so everybody fits in it. And then they all go in. He's lying on his sick bed. It's a very awkward silence. Finally, Shariputra, the main disciple of Buddha, breaks the ice and says, okay, if you're so holy, how come you're sick all the time? And Vimalakirti explains that human beings are carrying with them so much pain, acknowledged and not acknowledged, unacknowledged, that the only way he can hear what people are trying to say is to be in as much pain as they're in. So he can listen through the pain to what people are actually trying to communicate. And so his sickness is his Buddhist practice. And Buddhist disciples of course, are silent. And for me, that is the way in which sickness, the virus, leads to Black Lives Matter. It's that you actually haven't been able to hear what people are trying to say because you have no way of sharing their pain, or it hasn't occurred to you to share their pain, or it hasn't occurred to you to recognize your own pain. This idea of, once you're in the experience of pain, both in the moment, but also pain that has moved across generations, across so many layers of injustice, across so many layers where it has not been right ever. How can we even begin to express that? We can rally, we can mobilize, we can create demonstrations, people set fire to things. There's lots of ways, but excuse me, what are we really trying to express? And who is capable of hearing? And what is that deep listening through pain that, of course, theater was created to deepen and enhance and give us all the skills to listen through pain and to recognize that somebody's in pain and we need to listen differently. And again, that person who is in such an extreme state is, in fact, a mirror of ourselves. We just haven't recognized our own extreme states. So anyway, the idea is working on this with a beautiful South Indian singer named Ganavya Doraiswamy, who's also a great jazz singer, and Michael Schumacher, one of the great stars of the Frankfurt Ballet in its golden era when it was performing in the Châtelet Theater, and Wang Dongling, who is perhaps the greatest living Chinese calligrapher. He's in his 70s. He's the ultimate representation of the tradition of calligraphy, this incredible way in which words become actions. You see a word actually embodied and you watch the word appear. And of course, calligraphy is a performative art. It's about the breath, it's about the gesture, it's about something that flows from your innermost self onto a piece of paper, and the action of the ink meeting the paper. Action painting is, of course, what we're talking about, and that a word becomes action. And this man is, not only a profound and beautiful and deep scholar, he's also a performance artist, and he's done lots of avant-garde installations where he is very inspired by avant-garde painting of the last 50 years. And so people gather and he performs on a piece of paper the size of a gymnasium. He will calligraph a part of the Tao Te Ching, and it's an overwhelming experience. And anyway, we just said, could we work on this Buddhist sutra with you? And these 2 pages, this very special 2 pages about the life, the fragility of the human body. He watched Michael dance, and we went through the Buddhist text carefully, and he said, yes, of course we have to do this. So we had begun to schedule it to be performed in museums, essentially. And then, of course, the virus showed up, and it was, unthinkable to do this. And I mentioned this on a podcast I gave, 3 weeks ago. And the next day I got a phone call from Gideon Lester of Bard College saying, excuse me, a Buddhist sutra doesn't belong in a theater or a stage. It belongs in cyberspace. It's where you can actually, as it says in the Buddhist text, with a single thought, the human body can appear in multiple universes. And that is, of course, what the internet is. And so just to realize that, in fact, this was a work that was, I've been thinking about it for 25 years, but it wasn't until 3 weeks ago I realized it belongs on the internet. So we've been rehearsing for 3 weeks on Zoom with Michael in Amsterdam and Ganavia in Boston and me in California. and Guangdongling in China. And it's really incredible experience to have 3 artists working on 3 continents on the same text and meditating and singing and moving and dancing and writing. And we will, in the autumn, make a live stream across the world. My hope is that it will be on a number of websites and parts of programs of theaters like Châtelet, film festivals, concert halls, museums, and hospitals and hospices. And I really want to put this artwork out into places where people are struggling with the virus and where people are aware of the truths of the fragility of the human body and what that fragility is all about. So that's the project we're working on right now every day. It's suddenly overtaken all of our lives, and it's beautiful to be able to offer something at this moment that does respond very deeply and very directly to the presence of the virus.
Peter, I think it's one of your outstanding talents that you know the importance of timing, and that you have an ability to find the zeitgeist and to find the artists who can speak so beautifully for the time. And as you know, I mean, it's something you have managed to do throughout your career, and it's an extraordinary gift. We were talking earlier about the way in which the cultural world and the artistic and artists need to help us in times like this. They need to find the way to help us find answers for what après demain is going to look like and how it's going to be better. They need to help us channel the energies that Black Lives Matters has shown us in recent weeks. And we were thinking, so in the world of sport, they had this beautiful, simple, symbolic, extraordinarily provocative, which is always a good sign, gesture to bend the knee. And what is the artistic equivalent for that? What is the action that we should be proposing to cultural institutions and to other artists?
Well, I think the real challenge right now is how to move the energy from the streets and from the demonstrations into the hardcore restructuring. Because, everybody, all the institutions and so on want to just make little adjustments and little, slight tinkering around the edges, but actually don't want to change the large scale structures. And it's in fact huge structural change, which is called for. And I was participating in a very intense faculty meeting 2 days ago, and we're talking about what really has to change in the university, and somebody said to me, so are you proposing to really break structures right now? And I said, excuse me, they are broken, in case you haven't noticed. None of this has worked for a very long time for most people on Earth. Now, how can we be perpetuating this? And now we have an economic crisis, an environmental crisis, a health crisis, and you want to go back to the same old thing that created all of that? Are you kidding? The message is not just a slight, mental shift of, oh, Black people are nice. The question is, what are the structural changes that need to be made? And how do we make them? And I'm very, honored to be living in Los Angeles, where the mayor and the city council have been doing really impressive work. And what it means that, of course, the police have been asked to do over the last 50 years, a lot of things that have nothing to do with police work, while we cut away the rest of the social fabric. Not every issue is a criminal issue, and yet that's the only response our society has over and over and over again. So what does it mean to defund the police? It doesn't mean that the police don't exist. It just means a whole bunch of elaborate social programs that should be in place that are not punitive in nature, but the opposite, that are about restorative and that are about giving people things they've always needed and any human being needs, but that have been very unequally distributed. And access, really powerful, meaningful, equal access. Those are, and reposition the funding priorities and actually grow the garden that we, of course, have in front of us instead of a prison and instead of a factory. And say, no, it's a garden, and you're meant to work very hard in this garden and take very deep pleasure.
So here's to very hard work and very deep pleasure.
Yes.
For two extremely good notes for us to finish on. And you have a day of, I know, very hard work and I hope very great pleasure ahead of you for your rehearsals. And Peter, you know that we're in the office here in the Théâtre du Châtelet, and you'll be here again very soon. And
Yes.
we can't wait to see you. And meanwhile, all our love and all our thanks.
All love, Ruth. And I would just say, by the way, that when we're there with our Josephine Baker evening, which of course we made before this moment of millions of people in the streets. But of course, when we made it, everyone said, really, that's very extreme. Are you sure you want it to be that extreme? And of course, the answer, particularly now, is, hello, yes, this is an extreme moment. And again, human beings need an extreme moment to come to their senses and to redirect their energies. And hopefully we've arrived at that moment.
Thank you so much, my dear. Here's to heartbreaking urgency. And see you
Lots
very
of love,
soon.
Ruth.
Thank you. Bye-bye, dear.
Lots of
Bye-bye.
love.